Generally speaking, Final Fantasy summons are a step above most simple magic spells or attacks, tending to unleash the raw elemental strengths of fire, ice, lightning and so forth. Evoking them is usually costly on the MP bar, but worth the output in the devastation that can be inflicted. But which are the best? I'm Sai for WhatCulture.com, and here are the 10 most powerful summons in Final Fantasy. Number 10, Knights of Round, Final Fantasy VII. This mighty materia, hidden in a cave that isn't marked on the map and that is accessible only via gold chocobo, strikes the foe 13 times. What makes it truly devastating is the fact it can be used alongside the Mime materia, allowing the party member equipped with Mime to immediately repeat the attack again. Even without this, there are few summons as iconic or as damaging. There's a reason why so many players remember spending hours breeding chocobos in order to acquire it. This is the only possible way to unlock the materia for use, aside from equipping the Master Summon materia. Among the most valuable in the game, this allows the equipped character to use any summon monster unrestricted. Typically, each can only be used a certain number of times in each battle. The Master Summon materia, however, requires the party to defeat Emerald Weapon, which is no mean feat without Knights of the Round in the first place. Number 9, Garuda, Final Fantasy XIV. Garuda is a recurring wind-based summon in the series, though her element is sometimes covered by a different summon instead, such as Final Fantasy VIII's Pandemonia. Her harpy-esque design is very appropriate as she's presented as a vicious clawed fighter. This has rarely been plainer in the series than in Final Fantasy XIV. In this title, the classic Summoner job class is available, and Garuda is a formidable ally for them. The attack used when summoned, Aerial Slash, which later became Aerial Blast, may not appear to be as damaging as the attacks used by other summons, but the key thing to remember with Garuda is that she specialises in tackling groups of foes. In Final Fantasy XIV, players are often beset by such hordes. Even for characters who are dedicated damage dealers, it can be hard to manage such an encounter if your abilities aren't multi-target, at least not efficiently. In such situations, Garuda is exactly the support you'll need. The fury of this wind summon can save a run in all sorts of situations. Number 8, SHANTOTTO, World of Final Fantasy. World of Final Fantasy is one of the most intriguing series entries ever. First and foremost, fan service is the name of the game, as Lan and Rin's adventures see them battling alongside a range of iconic Final Fantasy creatures dubbed Mirages. The unique stacking mechanic and adorable art style isn't for everybody, but nobody could say the team didn't try something here. Familiar summon monsters such as IFRIT, Ramuh and Shiva can be claimed and used as Mirages, while heroes from across the main series, including Cloud, Shulk, Warrior of Light, Celeste and so on, can be unlocked as champions. These warriors are summoned in the conventional sense if the player has purchased their individual medal and filled their star meter enough to do so. Champions tend to unleash an attack upon an opponent and simultaneously boost a stat for all party members before disappearing. SHANTOTTO is perhaps the strongest of them all, though summoning her is quite pricey at 2 stars. SHANTOTTO's magic burst buffs the party's magic stat, but the damage dealing portion of the ability is the standout. It's able to prey on the opponent's elemental weakness, whatever it might be. This means that SHANTOTTO is often the best choice for a damage dealing champion unless the foe in question is resistant to magical attacks in general. Number 7, Hades, Final Fantasy VII. Hades has made several appearances in the Final Fantasy series and has never seemed quite as foreboding as he does in the 7th numbered installment. Looking like Skeletor's more badass brother, Hades' summon attack is the devastating Black Cauldron, in which this monstrous being launches great torrents of mysterious potions at foes. This attack is non-elemental, meaning there are no resistances to its damage. This isn't the crux of the attack, however. Black Cauldron also inflicts a cocktail of status effects on the enemy. There are 8 of them in all, including the particularly debilitating Paralyze and Frog. This stops the enemies from moving entirely and ensures that, if they get a chance to, their little froggy forms won't be nearly as threatening. Of course, some enemies can't be affected by some of these effects, meaning that Black Cauldron won't always work to its full potential. It's incredibly strong though, allowing the party to a certain extent take on very powerful foes with impunity. The materia itself is also pretty cool as well, as it can be used via materia pairing to defend the player against the status ailments it can inflict. All of them at once, in fact, and if they prefer, they can use this to instead imbue their physical attacks with the chance to inflict them. Number 6, Bahamut, Final Fantasy V. The devastating draconic might of Bahamut can be harnessed in many games in the series, and he's one of the most iconic returning Final Fantasy creatures. In FF5, summons were still a relatively new concept for the games, having been introduced only with the 3rd installment. At this time then, the roster was rather limited, but one thing was certain: Bahamut was the ultimate summon monster in the game. A level 5 summon no less, who could be unlocked only through a familiar method by defeating him. The boss battle against Bahamut is a multi-phase affair not to be trifled with. The foe's legendary attack, Mega Flare, can easily wipe out an unprepared said party, and he'll switch up his approach as he's slowly worn down. The good news is that said Mega Flare will also prove just as effective against your opponent if you're able to triumph and earn Bahamut as a summon. The attack doesn't boast any positive effects to your party, but it is a simple source of huge damage. Number 5, IFRIT, Final Fantasy 16. In the latest installment of the franchise, protagonist Clive Rossfield quickly reveals himself to wield the Blessing of the Phoenix. Utilising it, he has access to abilities like the Phoenix Shift, which allows him to warp towards opponents. The Flaming Icon's abilities are largely offensive, but the second icon of fire, IFRIT, is the very last word in flaming destruction. Clive discovers he's the dominant of IFRIT some way into the adventure, and the destruction he leaves in his wake while battling to come to terms with that is harrowing to behold. This is undoubtedly the most formidable and powerful iteration of IFRIT yet, and that's certainly saying something for an entity that has been known to ride a flaming meteor into battle and slam it into opponents. IFRIT's Ignition and Will of the Wike's abilities allow Clive to smash into foes, set up combos, and mitigate incoming damage. His skill set focuses on all-out assault, and there's even more in his locker than that. Number 4, the Major Sisters, Final Fantasy X. With Final Fantasy X being so heavily focused on the exploits of Summoner Yuna, the Aeons of the game's world and their connection with the Faith have a very prominent part to play in the story. Naturally though, they are also very powerful allies when called upon in battle. In Final Fantasy X, Aeons can be controlled for a short time by the player, whom issues commands from a small menu. The iconic Major Sisters, however, don't work like that at all. A trio of entities as formidable as they are capricious, they can be evoked on the battlefield but will act of their own accord. Players can only suggest commands for them to take, with the result being random. However, they have great offensive and defensive strengths, as each of the trio specialises in a different type of magic. After the painstaking process of unlocking them, which will also see the player recruit the mighty Yojimbo among others, the payoff is potentially fantastic. Managing them to their individual overdrives can be tricky, but doing so grants access to their ultimate technique, the devastating Delta attack. Number 3, Carbuncle, Final Fantasy IX. This tiny and undeniably adorable creature isn't a damage dealer, and its familiar effect is also quite niche in a lot of cases. It's best known for adding the reflect status effect to the whole party, allowing them to bounce magical spells launched at them back at the caster. The limitation to this, of course, is that you can no longer heal yourself with cure spells. So what makes Final Fantasy IX's iteration of Carbuncle so formidable? It has several curious effects that can be very strong, and it's an awful lot of fun to experiment with. Learned exclusively by Aiko, Carbuncle has access to 4 different attacks: the familiar Ruby Light, as well as Emerald Light, Pearl Light, and Diamond Light. After being learned, Carbuncle will use the attack that corresponds to the named add-on if Eco is equipped with it, such as the Emerald, Pearl, and Diamond. Emerald Light casts Haste on everybody, while Pearl Light bestows Shell on the team, and Diamond Light bestows Vanish, rendering the team immune to physical attacks. As such, Carbuncle might not be a damage dealer, but it's one of the most versatile summons in all of Final Fantasy. Number 2, Eden, Final Fantasy VIII. Only a few very special attacks, such as Quiztis's Limit Break move Shockwave Pulsar, can strike for more than 9,999 damage in a single hit. The Guardian Force Eden's formidable Eternal Breath can also achieve this. As such, it could be considered the most powerful summon in the entire series up to the point of this adventure. It's certainly a grueling journey to unlock Eden, as it can only be acquired from Ultima Weapon prior to the time compression anyway. Strictly speaking, summoning Guardian Forces is far from the most practical way to play, and so the strength of their attacks alone doesn't really count for much. Eden also has the capacity to make your party members absurdly strong too then, as it holds some incredibly useful abilities. Expend X3-1, which allows characters to use 3 magic spells for the price of 1, and some other rare ability junctions are in its arsenal. Those who are looking to get the very most from Final Fantasy VIII's controversial junction system and make their team members the strongest they can possibly be will want to acquire Eden as soon as they can. And number 1, Alexander, Final Fantasy IX. Sometimes in the series, summons are nothing more than a gameplay mechanic, allowing for mighty attacks to be called forth by summoners. In Final Fantasy IX, Eidolons are prominent parts of both the storyline and the wider lore of the world of Gaia itself. Recurring summon monster Alexander appears in the game, but unusually can't be summoned by the player themselves. Instead, he's evoked by the 2 summoners in the party, Eiko and Garnet. It's their calling, Eiko explains, to do exactly that amidst the turmoil of Kuja's attack on Alexandria. Having taken control of Bahamut, he unleashes the Dragon King on the town, and Bahamut proceeds to launch its barrage at Alexandria Castle. From the name, you can see where this is going. The majestic wings of Alexander, in response, close around the castle, absorbing the blow undamaged. In the cutscene, the game takes a moment to demonstrate that the castle is glowing as the wings unfurl again. Alexander is defeated only by a blast from the Terran ship, the Invincible. In the context of the game, effortlessly absorbing Bahamut's assault suggests that Alexander is the most powerful Gaian Eidolon. These might be the most powerful summons, but which ones are the hardest to unlock? That video is on screen now, so click it to stay with us here at WhatCulture Gaming. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment down below on your favourite Final Fantasy summons. Head over to WhatCulture.com for more content every day. I've been Si for WhatCulture, and have a good week.